Ramadia. Transport to Ramadia, Part 1. Ramadia, Part 1, Transport to Ramadia. On those occasions when he heard voices from a short distance which he apprehended indistinctly, John Nolan understood that his sense of these remarks could never attain a complete lack of ambiguity, and as with his own mind, he sometimes heard voices generated by an unknown dance between memory and imagination. He could never be certain, in exactly the same sense as just described, what he was listening to, almost as though he had handed off the baton of his reason to one of his teammates, someone quite different from himself, at first not even recognizable. But I have invited this to happen from time to time. I was young, I was a hopeless dreamer, and I came to admire men who had succeeded and made substantial and even indelible contributions to the worlds of politics, business, science, engineering, and the arts. My technique is to induce a hypnotic trance in myself, an ability I have used for much of my life, even when I was a boy. In my youth, I had a long attention span, essentially, and marital turmoil between my parents did the rest. But this is a story of John Nolan, one of those teammates. He understands that he has been conscripted to serve as my stand-in. John Nolan is one of many different masks. Let's discover how different. Nolan is not a rudderless personality. He has been guided for years by the ideals found displayed in art and literature. A professional man, still in the thick of it, still trying to sell his stories and articles to a journal or a magazine. But none of his work has caught the attention of anyone. Luckily for Nolan, he has a wife who loves him and takes care of him. They have begun their relationship with a 6-month-long email correspondence. Then he had first gone to see her in China. He had inherited a little money and risked nothing. And once he had cut all his ties with America, he'd become an expatriate, and the experience of living as a racial minority in a foreign country changed him forever. As a 3.5-year sojourn in Kunming changed his life, enabled him to grow into a different sort of human being from the lot he would have otherwise become, to see himself as a witness. But prior to this, he hadn't gained enough living experience to do that. Living experience, which in the main means living social experience. But this drumbeat insistence that the validation of living experience must underlie every genuine description of it cannot drown out literary art. As a fine counterexample, as in The Red Badge of Courage, whose author, Stephen Crane, had never fought in the war but covered the Spanish-American War in Cuba, shows. Or take The Confessions of Nat Turner by William Styron. He wasn't black, and Nat Turner was an actual man who led a slave uprising in Virginia. From his lucky perch, Nolan spends his days weaving tales out of the detritus of his remembered past, or pure projections of his imagination, which he nowadays prefers, living his life in retreat from the world. The stories he wishes to write are ones which could grab readers and send them into generative, reflective spaces, stories which leave a lasting impression upon the reader. But to do this, the characters portrayed must seem familiar, believable, ordinary, a common array of occupations and beliefs represented. This story would first be conceived not in skeletal form, but as the germ of an idea. If I were to have Nolan take photographs for a newspaper, for example, I could dream up a situation in which he is immersed and is photographing, such as in the midst of a rioting, looting mob, or in a town visited by a tornado. He soon seeks shelter after obtaining several pictures, now having retreated from the press of the rioting mob or the blistering savage winds of the tornado. He runs into a church or a basement bar or merely an alley where a few others are gathered waiting out the storm. So while Nolan is comparatively safe along with a few other strangers, the bar owner races to the door and locks it shut. Nolan is the last to get in. He checks his camera, it's still in good shape. Then he looks at the others who are all silent, 2 women and 3 men, one of whom is the bartender. The women are friends in their mid-20s. The bartender is white-haired and portly. One of the male customers wears a business suit. The other fellow wears jeans, boots, and a plaid shirt and a baseball cap. "You a photographer for the paper? How come you're not out there doing your job?" one of the women says. "Well, I took plenty of pictures already, lady. Figured I'd wait out the storm with the rest of you," says Nolan. "You're lucky you got in here when you did. As soon as I heard the roar of the crowd outside when you opened the door, I knew I had to lock this place down," the bartender says. "None of us are going anywhere for a while." "Pour a round of drinks for everyone," said the man in the suit, "even the newcomer." "What are you having, pal?" the bartender asked Nolan. "A shot of Jameson and a glass of Guinness," Nolan says. He turns to the man in the suit and says, "Thanks, mister, I appreciate it." "You been out there most of the day?" the man asked him. "Yeah, I've covered a lot of ground today," Nolan says. "People have been marching through the streets, then they confront a phalanx of police. I remained just to the side, brushing alongside the parked cars. Then I took a long series of photos during the brief standoff, but after a perfunctory command to disperse, the police surged into the crowd with shields and truncheons. I narrowly escaped a blow to the head, even though my press pass was plainly visible," Nolan says. Then he knocks back the remainder of his drink. The other woman says, "Well, I can see why you wanted to get the hell out of there. Who wants to get smashed by a billy club and then get arrested?" Part 2, the voices from Ramadia. The traveling salesman, who was now slowly approaching retirement, pulled into a motel parking lot one evening around 6 o'clock. His sales route took him up and down Interstate 5. He paid for his room with a company-issued debit card. He worked for a small outfit which produced and packaged beef jerky, which sold exceedingly well over the years. But the success of the business had been in question for a decade since its inception. And throughout the time, Charles Renlow had created and serviced the sales route and had made a respectable living. Soon, however, he would venture into his retirement years and a way of life he knew nothing about, a life of unremitting leisure. People of leisure occupy 2 principal classes: those with loads of cash easily at hand, and those who are broke. Being, he hoped, among the former and much luckier group, Charles, or Chuck as he liked people to call him, with its sturdier sound, which his father had called him from the time he was a boy, Chuck felt immense relief and gratitude for having spent a mostly productive life. Once he was securely ensconced in his motel room, he called his wife, Miriam, to let her know that he would be back home during tomorrow evening, hopefully no later than 9 o'clock. It had been a long 2-week stretch, and now he was done, except for one more visit tomorrow. A 45-minute drive east of I-5, a town of 5,000 people, about half immigrants from Mexico.